In this podcast, we'll delve into the critical importance of regularly testing your backups and shed some light on the common misconception that having a backup actually equates to security. We'll also explore the delegation of backup responsibilities within your teams and, of course, mining your backup data for key business intelligence.
So last week I checked my newsfeed and there was one article coming up with the title, "A not tested backup is worse than no backup." And I thought a little bit about it and I felt like, okay, you're feeling secure and you think you have a backup, but maybe it's not working. And then you have a big problem. So I just wanted to talk about that and maybe about the companies that think, okay, we set up a backup 10 years ago and now we're safe and good and well and we think it's still working, but nobody ever checked. So you as our expert, Tony, sure can give us some input there.
It's nice to know that you think so much about backups, honestly. So I know it's one of your favourite subjects.
Yeah,
is that
absolutely.
right? You were saying offline before we started this podcast how much you enjoy backups, and that. Nice. No, I like I say, I think so. Is backups Schrodinger's cat? That sort of situation whereby is it in the box? I'm not sure. I haven't opened it yet. That sort of situation. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I feel like for some companies it is. They know in the back of their head they did something about it a few years ago, but especially like a CEO or somebody like that doesn't know if it's still running or what's happening with it. I feel like for a lot of people it's checked once and then it's forgotten, and I think that's quite dangerous.
Yeah, I think I know you're spot on. I suppose from a backup perspective, there are so many things that can go wrong. I suppose backup systems have tended to be not the most reliable things on the planet. There's a lot of data going on. And also what you're protecting can often change. So it's a moving goalpost from the point of view of what you're backing up as well. So you may back up your database server, but then maybe there's a setting on your database server that says, when you're backing this up, take these databases here, please. But then at some point in the future, you decide to back up you create another database, but it doesn't automatically adopt it. So then you're not backing up your new key database that you didn't think about. So there's lots of elements whereby not testing your backup is just not doing the job for you as a business, I suppose.
So I'm not doing my own backup. I mean, even at home, I have my IT department that does it. So
is that what you're calling him? Right. Okay, good.
That's how it feels to be the IT department.
It's delegation. That's what it is. I'm the IT department as well at mine. Not just for my other half, but also for the rest of my family as well.
That was great. I studied business informatics, so I was the one everybody went to. And now I have a boyfriend who studied informatics, so is officially now more qualified than I am, and everybody directly calls him, even my parents. So I'm doing great there.
Oh, nice. But I think that's it though. But we delegate as well, don't we? I think most businesses, your finance director is not checking whether the backups work. Your managing director isn't. Even your IT manager might not be. They're probably relying on the people that they're the IT technical guys to do it, or their backup representative, or whatever it turns out to be. So everyone delegates responsibility for it, but it is something that we should be spending a lot of time doing. And I have seen a lot of businesses who are very confident about the fact that their backups work, but really don't spend a lot of time checking. But it's not just about, I suppose, testing backups. People tend to assume is going to be quite straightforward, but it can be quite complicated. It's not just a question of restoring a few files and making sure that everything's there. If you're running databases, then restoring a database is not just about getting the database back. You have to put it into the database engine and then confirm that what's in the engine is what you expect to see. So you almost have to, and the way to test that might be that you have to run the application against it. So testing databases can be a challenge. Same with email systems. How do you test that your entire email system is restorable? Maybe less of an issue these days with Office 365, but certainly you can get back individual emails quite easily. But getting back email systems is a challenge, and normally very large. So it's people don't want to try and do that. But the question is how important is it to the business if you don't and you lose it? And I think that's
One question that comes to mind on my side, because I have never done it. How do you double check the scope? Because we all know IT changes a lot, and we have software as a service and all of that. So how do you make sure the scope of your backup is correct and all of your systems that you're backupping are in the backup?
You any thoughts on this question?
I think it starts with risk management also there. It's not only for IT security, but also for data security. So you have to understand what your business is earning money with and start from there to see which systems are relevant. And oftentimes there are people who can completely tell you how many euros or pounds are lost if a system is not running for an hour, a day, or a week. And I think then you already have your top 10 list to work on.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think most people don't think of their data in that way. I mean, we find the same thing with disaster recovery planning, is the fact that people don't think of their businesses as, right, which systems can I do without? The general response is, if you go to your management team and say, right, what can you do without? They'll say, we don't want to do without anything. Let's just keep it all. But then you tell them how much that will cost, and they go, okay, maybe we'll change our mind slightly on that one. So I think it's about the business understanding what's important, but I don't think, I think that's a very challenging question from the backup guy.
Absolutely.
To task his managing director, right, what can I lose in the event? What is least important to you out of all of these systems? Because the managing director will go like, well, I don't want to lose any of them. Is that you not doing your job right? I mean, what? It's a very difficult question to ask. So I think the key point really, at least for me as well, is you need to define a policy as to what you want to protect and protect it in that defined way. And that policy doesn't come from the IT guy. It doesn't come from the backup guy. It comes from the business. But that policy tends to be very broad, i.e., we will protect everything for a set period of time. We will keep this many copies. We will keep this many of them off-site, and that sort of stuff. But then what tends to happen is those policies maybe don't get refreshed. So for example, many people started off running their backup solutions where everything was internal to their business, but then they start using Teams and OneDrive and Office 365. Then they move their CRM to Salesforce and all of these things. So now our backup solution can't back those up anymore because they're now off-site. So they almost get ignored from the policy because the policy was for our backup system, and our backup system can't protect those. So therefore we don't protect those. So there's often a lot of the movement of things is what causes problems. But I think that's the same with a lot of IT systems.
But I think or based on your experience, do you see a change in the technology of backup also? Not only the processes, that's for sure, we need to be up to date there, but what about the underlying technical stuff? I remember putting tapes into some slots and having large tape machinery going around, but I don't know. What's the current state of backup? How do you do it? Do we just blow everything up into the cloud, or what's your take on that?
Should we do a history? Should we do a potted history of backup?
Why not?
I did some digging on the stuff I've done over the last few years. So let's do a potted history of backup. It won't take long. I'll try not to make it too boring. So
first, there was the floppy disk.
We're not going back. I do go back that far, but not quite that far. So let's say 20 years ago, which is a long time in IT anyway. At this point, Where Is the Love by the Black Eyed Peas are in the charts. Yeah. So if that sort of brings it back.
20 years ago?
That's 20 years ago. That was 2003. So 2003. So backup solutions primarily are based upon the internal network of that particular site. So the local LAN. It's almost all going to tape. Backup to disk was very expensive. So that was less common, maybe with very large businesses. We all loved and hated tape, but we all had fire safes to put the tapes into, and we had iron mounting to take the tapes offsite. It was not abnormal for smaller businesses and even medium-sized businesses for the IT managers to take the tapes home at night. Bizarrely, because there was no real thought of someone stealing my tapes and stealing my data, because they didn't have my backup solution, so therefore they couldn't get my data off it, so therefore it wasn't really a thing. Bandwidth was extremely expensive. So therefore, even businesses with multiple sites that were linked quite often ran backups in isolation and didn't try and send them between the sites because there wasn't enough bandwidth to be able to send that data. So that's 20 years ago. So moving on 7 years. So this is now 2007. So Katy Perry's singing about fireworks. I don't know, that sort of stuff. Now
you say those words and those songs just immediately pop into my mind. That's crazy.
Hopefully. Don't start singing though, because that's just...
I will try to hold myself back.
Okay, good. But Lisa, if you want to start singing, you fire away.
Huh?
The backup software is now a lot more sophisticated. So primarily what we've gained here is we've gained compression and deduplication, both of which are now sort of more mainstream and therefore more affordable. We have much higher capacity drives, so therefore we're now doing disk-based backups primarily. That's our primary backup target, to go to disk. But we're still using tape for our long-term storage. We're still sending our data off-site using tape because while external bandwidth is improving, it's still quite expensive. Businesses that have multiple sites, though, because they tend to have a bigger link between the two, are now doing off-site backups by sending their data between sites, which is quite useful. Data sizes and file sizes are expanding, and this is causing problems now with running stuff on the local network. So if you're backing up large quantities of PDF files and image files and various bits and bobs like that, and you're trying to do that while your users are working, then you're impacting your users because there's literally not enough bandwidth on the network to allow you to do it. And so now that we're getting to the stage whereby, do we need a separate network for our backups? So we've got one network card sending to our customers, our users, one network card sending to our backup systems. So really backup networks become a thing. And while they're expensive to install and administer, they actually make the lives for our users a lot better, even in medium-sized businesses. 2017, Ed Sheeran releases Perfect. There you go. Yeah, okay. You've heard it a lot at weddings. This is a good time, I suppose, but the key things here now, bandwidth and storage are more or less, they're not free, but they're certainly very affordable. So tape is widely despised and looked back on as a horrible thing. Almost all backups are to disk, even to second sites, even to external providers, all that sort of stuff. You're just sending data onto disk, or we're replicating it through bandwidth to disk somewhere else. Our backup software has got much better at integrating with our domains. So we're backing up our Windows servers, we're backing up our SQL servers, we're backing up our Exchange boxes, we're backing up our Oracle systems, we're backing up all of these things by integrating with that software and by integrating with the domain. So backup is easy now. Internal LANs are much faster because we've got 10 gig Ethernet, 40 gig Ethernet even. So we're now no longer getting large quantities of bandwidth having an impact. So therefore our backup LANs are now no longer required. So we can take those away because we're not there because they're difficult to administer and they've got a complexity overhead. Cloud is becoming more important. So we've got our SaaS services like Office 365 and Salesforce. Businesses are running key systems in AWS and Azure, but quite often our backup solutions don't deal with that because they were designed to deal with stuff that we're running internally. So some businesses now, we're having multiple backup solutions, some for the internal systems and then individual point solutions to back up other systems that they have outside. So now pick your favorite song from 2023 because we're bang up to date. So these days, storage and bandwidth, I don't know what the standard size of a 7.2K disk is these days, but it's enormous. So, and bandwidth is really easy to get a hold of and very cost effective. External providers are now doing object storage, and that's now considered the norm. So essentially a lot of backup solutions just send their data to a local disk copy and then straight off to object storage because it's cheap and inexpensive. Backup solutions are far more capable now. They're able to do the local network. They're able to do the public cloud. They're able to do SaaS providers. We're doing it all within one solution with a lot of providers. So with a lot of backup software. But since 2019, we've got ransomware. And ransomware essentially is a massive threat to all of our backup systems. So the key challenges that it's causing are our backup systems tend to now be on the same LAN as our data is. We're storing data locally on disk. which is more easy to be attacked and destroyed. It integrates with our domains. If a ransomware attacker gets you, they get onto your domain, they elevate their privileges, they become your domain admins, they've got access to your backup solution. So therefore, being ransomware attacked means that this integration, this friendliness that we got from the domain is now a negative. Multiple backup solutions, providing multiple entry points for attack. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because we've got separate backup solutions means that we're any safer. But the bizarre thing is some of the elements that we gleefully got rid of a few years ago are now coming back with a vengeance. Tape. We all hated it. 2018. All of a sudden, tape is a lot more attractive than it used to be. Isolations of backup systems from the business domain so that there's nobody able to administer them is now a good thing. Let's take it off the domain. Let's make it more complicated for us to use, but let's make it more complicated for attack as well. And even backups being on a completely isolated network is now coming back as a big thing because in reality, it being on a separate network means that just because the admin has rights to one network, they don't necessarily have rights to your backup network. So it's not a bandwidth thing anymore. It's now a security and an isolation thing. So backups have changed a lot over the last 20 years. But in reality, the technology's kind of stayed the same, but they're going in waves as to where these things sort of fit in.
I didn't see that one coming with the tapes coming back. Which LTO revision are we on now?
Oh, now you're asking 9. I don't know. Let's look it up. 18 terabytes native, 45 terabytes compressed.
Crazy.
One tape.
One tape of this size.
Yeah,
basically.
It's
crazy.
Yeah, it's a bit bonkers. They cost about £100 each.
What?
As well. And this is it. It's almost the ideal place to store data from a ransomware perspective, because of the fact that it's complete. You can take it out and transport it away, and it's entirely separate from your system. It's offline. It's air gapped. It does everything in that respect, but it is still a physical medium, and therefore it's still susceptible to temperature. It's still susceptible to atmospheric conditions. It's still susceptible to moisture. It can still be stolen. It can still be broken. So it's not perfect, but it's still a thing, and
it still takes a lot of time to restore, right?
Well, yeah, no, exactly. I think that's a fair point. I think tape, you can write to tape in one or two ways. You can either write linearly, where you literally stream all your data directly to it, and that's faster from a restore perspective. But it means that you have to have all your data in a line ready to go. But most people restore where they will write to it in a sort of interleaved way. So you'll end up with the data coming in blocks of individual servers. So it means you've got to read, move, read to be able to get an individual server back. But that process means that it's slower to get it back, but it means it's faster to put it on. So everything's a trade-off.
And there we come back to your backup isn't a backup until you tested it and it works there. Because I think oftentimes companies also tend to forget how long a restore can take. And it's not only restoring a machine, but it's restoring an Active Directory, for example. What is all commingled in there is so much. You really have to understand what you're doing there. And to understand and to really get some kind of, what's the word?
Validity? Validity or reassurance that it's working?
Reassurance, yeah. It's more to get the reassurance that it's working, you have to do it often, I think. It's not only a one-time ready check mark. It's something that you have to do regularly to understand.
There's a thing whereby I think VMware or VMs, not VMware particularly, but VMs made this a lot simpler. Because it's entirely possible to take a virtual machine and restore it back in its entirety, disconnect it from a network and power it back on again. Thank you very much. And if it's a domain controller, it won't be wildly happy about that because they don't like being disconnected from their domain. But you can do that and then test to make sure that it contains all the things you're expecting it to contain.
Absolutely.
But the end. So VM's ability to isolate individual services down to one component being the virtual machine, but keep that as a self-contained object means that it's made it an awful lot simpler. Imagine back in the day where we all had physical servers doing all these things. So you had a physical server being a domain controller, a physical server being a SQL box, a physical server being your Exchange box, a physical server being your Oracle clusters or whatever it turns out to be. Trying to bring those back to physical boxes to test that they worked was nightmarish. But with VMs, you can just bolt them together inside a virtual network and say, bang, power them on, see if they work. Job done. It's, set a script to do it. It's easy enough. So much simplified, but still something that has to be done.
And to be tested, I had one story somewhere in my past, won't name names, where a IT colleague restored a SQL server too fast because he did what you just said, Tony. He restored the whole VM and he didn't think about the SQL database that has its own backup. So he restored the server and brought it back to the production line. And then, production was starting again, putting in new data, and the data that was in between the problem and his restore was completely lost because that backup couldn't be put in back anymore. So it's good when it's easy, but you still have to understand what you're doing there.
He didn't restore the logs. He just restored the database itself. So
he just restored the VM and lost all the production data. That was really great.
Yeah, not good.
So how often does such a restore test make sense? Like we say, do it regularly or do it often, but regularly could be once a year, could be once every 10 years. So it would still be regular.
Yeah.
Every 100 years is good then, because then it's the next person's problem.
You don't want to stress the IT guys. It's fine.
No.
I think it depends on the system. But also, you got to bear in mind, I suppose, I think restore testing is really important and something that we should definitely be doing. But also, you got to understand restores are also happening. So people will still be restoring from their backup systems. So to my mind, if a month ago you did a backup and a restore from that backup and it worked, you don't then need to test that 2 weeks later because you've already tested that. But by all means, go and find something else to test that you haven't tested and restore that. So I think it's valid to sort of say, right, okay, well, if it is a key business system and we want it back, it's business critical, then you could argue that you should be restoring it once every 2 months, 3 months, just to make sure that you can get it back in a solid way. But that would require then that you spend some time doing it, testing it, because just bringing it back up or just looking to see if it's got a file there or just looking to see if it's restored okay isn't the answer to the question. You need to make sure that it functions in its role. The database has to still contain the valid data and has to be worked to the application that's calling that database. Active Directory has to be able to communicate with the remainder of the domain. All of these systems have to function. If you're just checking for files, well, simple, no problem. But when it comes to actually doing applications, it's a little bit more complicated. So many businesses will say, well, actually, no, I'm happy doing it once every 6 months because I know it takes me 4 man days to test it properly when I start the process. I can't do that every month. It's just overkill. So there's a point. But the other point is that you don't want a situation whereby you leave it for 2 years and then suddenly realize that you weren't backing it up, just as you said at the start. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, so backup is like a safety measure and all of that. But in times of big data and data science and all of that, can we use backup data also for giving benefits to our company besides the safety point? So if everything is working, can backup still have a benefit for us?
Yeah, I think there's been an argument for it for some time, the fact that backup data is a copy of our data that we should be utilizing. That's, I think the analogy that I used previously with some of my customers is, imagine you have a database that contains all of your invoice data for your business for the last 10 years. So you've got every single thing you've ever invoiced in this whopping great database. But that database is under a lot of load all the time, so therefore you're not really utilizing it, or you're utilizing it extensively with your business systems on a daily basis. Well, there's nothing wrong with maybe taking that data and restoring it to another database, and then using that as a way of then mining that data to get more insight into the way that your business works. What products are you selling when? What times of the year? What times of the day? What customer locations? What delivery locations? You could use that information to then say, well, hold on a minute. It turns out that in October, November, I sell a lot of stuff to do with Halloween. Maybe I should be doing a marketing campaign in June, July to be pushing that process forward. It turns out that I sell a lot of equipment to the medical industry that I didn't realize. So therefore, maybe I should be targeting that vertical, or providing additional offers or benefits around it. So there's a lot of argument to saying, well, maybe you should be mining the data that you take to be able to try and gain some insight into the way that your business works. You can do that with restores. So you could restore it into another system, another database. But the other argument is, if you back up your data to, what we traditionally do is we back up data to slow disk. We back it up to slow disk and we compress it and we deduplicate it because it stores in a smaller space. If we were to back that up to fast disk, then there's an argument to say, well, why don't we just power it on where it is? It's on fast disk, solid state disk maybe. Let's power it on there, launch that as a VM. So it is actually our database server, but another copy of it. And then let's interrogate that. So we don't even need to restore it. We can just run it from where it is. So there's an argument now to sort of saying, well, actually, let's put fast drives into our backup solution and then utilize the backup solution as our storage array, and run our systems from there. And then you can start saying, well, actually, then I could run it there in the event that my primary server died. So my primary server goes bang, or gets a nasty virus, or goes offline, or is encrypted, or what have you. You could literally shut it down and delete it, power on your backup on your solid state drives, and then move it back to the live environment while it's running. So you could use your backup solution then as a sort of pseudo DR environment to allow you to restore data back. So there's lots of ways in which we can utilize the data, but we need to design it in that respect because we don't have high speed storage normally. So that needs to be a factor that we choose when we buy our systems to make sure that's the case.
The second version is really interesting, I think. The first one, I think I heard in the past, but the SSD direct copy usage, I think that's pretty interesting.
There's a lot of businesses, I think physics gets in the way with regard to this sort of stuff. Bandwidth in particular gets in the way, and so does getting data off disk. So a lot of businesses these days are saying, well, we want to have our data back fast, but there's a limit to how fast you can get data off slow disk. So if you were to back up all your environment and you've got 200 terabytes worth of data, let's say, reasonable chunk, 200 terabytes worth of data, you would put that on disk and say, right, how fast can I get that off? It's days to weeks to do restore from that data. So if you think, well, in the event that my site burns down, I can just get my data back from my backup, that's fine. You can, because you tested it. Well done. But you can't get it back for another 2 weeks because that's how long it's going to take to be able to store all that data. So then the argument becomes, well, hold on a minute. If restoring my data at speed is my primary requirement, yeah, you need a backup solution with very fast disk in it and very chunky network cards as well. So then you can then get that data out in hours or days because of the fact that you've got so much bandwidth and so much performance from those underlying disks. But it's going to cost you a lot more from the point of view of a backup solution, but it means you get much better performance.
What's your take on putting that to the cloud? Because in the cloud, you can easily spin up a disaster recovery environment, maybe. You have to plan it, obviously, and so on. You have to test it, all the things. But what's your take on that? Are there any pros or cons doing it for one of the large cloud providers?
There were pros and cons for everything, aren't there? I think that's our mantra in IT. But I think the key thing for me though is it's the visibility of those pros and cons that is the challenge with the cloud. If you were to send your data to the cloud as a backup storage target, you can maybe store it in object storage in the cloud in an inexpensive way, and it will be ready for you to then use. As soon as you were to then say, right, okay, I want to take these, 500 VMs and bring them up as instances within the public cloud, you haven't really paid for those instances prior to this point. You may have done the occasional test restore, but the cloud doesn't just charge for instances. It charges for bandwidth usage. It charges for writes to disk, reads to disk, loads of other things that it just makes up as it goes along with regard to that. So I think the key challenge from the point of view of a business doing that is, how much is it going to cost me when I bring it up? And actually, that's very difficult to calculate. So while the cloud is very flexible and provides a lot of functionality with regard to that, you are doing... If the best way to utilize the cloud is to design your workload for the cloud, which I believe it is, and I think you do as well, Christian, because we've had this conversation before, then this is not the best way to utilize the cloud. But also from a business perspective, if you've just had the world's largest disaster and you've lost all your data centers, most of your machinery, there's been an enormous fire, whatever it turns out to be, do you really want to be pushing your business into an environment where you don't know how much it's going to cost you for the next 6 months? And I think that's a difficult one. So I think visibility or being able to cost that environment is really important. So I would say if people are DRing into the cloud, go ahead. It's a great tool. It's resource that's available immediately as soon as you need it. But you pay for that resource, and you need to understand those costs. So I think costs are a big thing with regard to that. So
it's with everything in IT, you have to know what you're doing, right?
Well, yeah.
Somewhere in the end.
Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? I think a lot of this is a bit of reading. I don't think you need. It's about getting different people's opinions as much as anything else. I love IT from the point of view that you can talk to 5 different people and get 5 completely different opinions, all of which are perfectly valid. It's really frustrating.
As long as they are only 5 opinions with 5 people, that's okay.
That's very true. In IT, we don't talk to more than one person, really, because we're not very social. That's the thing, to be honest. No, this is the thing. There are many ways to skin Schrodinger's cat in this situation, I suppose. But yeah, to go back to the same pun. But yeah, there are many ways to skin the cat, and I think there's no right or wrong answer. But it's nice to have choices. And then to allow the business, I suppose, to make the decisions as to which way to go. I know a lot of businesses that will be more than happy, probably smaller ones maybe, be more than happy to say, I don't care, I need to be back up straight away because I can't afford to be down. Bigger businesses are probably a little bit more pragmatic about it and going, well, yeah, maybe I have another site I can use in the meantime, or maybe I can change the way I do things. So there may be and I can't afford to get a bill that is that big without understanding it. So difficult to budget for. So it depends on your business requirements.
So in the end, as Lisa said, a backup that is not tested is not a backup, right? Still, do we agree on that?
Yes, but I would let me add one more thing, because I think the one of the other elements that people sort of tend to miss a little bit about backup is actually doing a backup, a restore needs not be hugely problematic. In this day and age, we live in an environment whereby we have backup systems that can perform backups as part of a schedule, but they can also perform restores as part of a schedule. They can run backup scripts as part of backups, but they can run the same scripts as part of restores. They can restore into virtualized environments where that data is running on the live network. They can also restore into virtualized environments where that data is isolated. So it's perfectly possible to more or less take, if you've got the resources, to say, well, I'm going to back up all of my systems over here, but then just as soon as I finish that backup, I'm immediately going to take 10 of those systems and restore them into this isolated environment over here. But then we also have, if you want to be more adventurous, you can then look at API-based interfaces like Power Automate, Ansible, SaltStack, and you can then schedule in scripts to run against those virtual machines to power them on, to check and see if the SQL servers are running, to check and see if the website's running, to check your Active Directory is responding in the way that you want it to. You can do that as part of a set of scripts without actually ever having to touch the system. So even though we're sort of saying, well, you don't need to restore every day, and you don't, but you could. The reason we're saying that is because of the fact the amount of time it takes. But we are living in a day and age whereby we can take all of these elements and kind of automate them. So why aren't we doing that more? Why aren't we automating our restore processes? Why aren't we automating validating the fact that it's working? So then we just get an email from Ansible saying, yeah, fine, did it. Everything looked okay. Responded to ping. These files were present. They were backed up yesterday. All that sort of stuff. It can do all that for us. So I think we're not maybe adventurous enough sometimes to do that sort of stuff with our backups. But I think that's definitely worth a look.
Yeah, automation is always an interesting part of doing things better. But you have to have time for it.
You do have to have time for it.
And you have to understand what you want to automate.
But you also have to. But it also saves you time. So I think this is it. This is the speculate to accumulate thing, isn't it? You invest time to save you time, and then the time that you then saved, you can invest elsewhere. But I think it's. I'm a firm believer in automating as much as I can, or with whatever application suits the job. But it saves me hours and hours every week, even in my current job. But it saves me hours and hours every week, even in my current job, doing automation. So I think it's something that really helps. And I think it's something that maybe we could stop firefighting more and try and help ourselves a little bit more sometimes. Right. So in answer to Lisa Moo's question, I think the key point is, a backup isn't a backup unless you can restore it. That is very true. But I think there's far more to backup maybe than most people actually utilize as part of their normal daily routine. Businesses can utilize it a lot more if they wanted to invest the time and energy into doing so. And I think, frankly, it's a worthy investment.